Y'all ever notice there's a pattern every time we get new ring IDs? They're always a duo, one is very strong and hated by God, while the other is their 2-0 or Chud Jr. I'm sure it's not on purpose, but it's funny when it's happened 3 times, with this latest one being pretty damn blatant about it. Except this time, these guys just really like mixing red and blue paint. Put simply, Falvis, Rodion, and Meursault are bleed sinking support that have their own form changes and get buffed with more ring units on the field. And seriously, these two fellas are so similar that I would call them 2 halves of the same unit, but that would be giving Meursault way too much credit since he only does about 50% of what Rodion does. I mean, don't take it from me, just look at the status list. But at the same time, you really should get Meursault. Rodion, sure, that's gonna be a player-by-player basis, but you absolutely should get Meursault before this event is over. And that's because he's the rare class of ID that's available with event currency. No pulls, no sparking, just play the event and you will get him. Because like, as much as these reviews are meant to be informative instead of just prescriptive advice, there isn't really beating the price of just play the game. But if I'm gonna tell you to snatch this man's and consider his mentor, let's take a look at what's in their Galleria. And to do that, I'm gonna introduce a new segment called Not Wasting Your Time. And while I do see the irony in introducing a new segment for that, there is a very good reason. These guys are extremely similar IDs in many ways, and they have some effects that are recurring throughout both of their kits. So we may as well get those recurring effects out of the way first so you don't have to hear me repeating them over and over and over again. Case in point, this sucker. Deal more damage for every X type of negative effect on target is on every single offensive move on both of these kits, and even on one of Rodion's 2 counters. So if there is one thing that you should know about how the ring units work, it's that leaving a touche hardy of several negative effects has been their MO from the very start. So whenever a buff triggers only when there are X types of negative effects on the target, I'm just gonna call that the ring clause and we'll move on. Thankfully, that's all the custom terminology we're gonna need here. And now that the palette's primed, the Ring Falvis Student Meursault is a blinking unit that leans more into the bleed side, as all ring units do. Case in point, his primary status is Mauled Color Rouge. This is a status that, based on his innate Falvis Student passive, will be inflicted on any enemy every time they are hit with one of his base skills. Any poor living canvas in this shade will gain bleed potency every time they're hit and defense level down at the end of the turn, both of these effects being more powerful at higher stacks. And then the stack decays at turn end. Now the fact that this effect only decays at turn end instead of on hit means there is no reason at all to not wail on an enemy that's smattered in a fat amount of red while you can. So even if Meursault isn't the more powerful ID of the two, he's still gonna help with bleed potency application through this. Oh, and just so you know, Mauled Color comes in several shades, so expect to see it brought up a lot today. But if this effect isn't enough for you, then throwing back to his Falvis Student passive, if Meur paints the town sufficiently red and inflicts enough rouge, he'll get his form change status Le Fauvisme Masque de Chien. In this big masked beast mode, he will deal more damage on how much mauled color of any color is on the target, inflict more blinking potency with his non-eco skills, and will assist with starting a bleed stack by inflicting bleed count on any enemy he hits that doesn't have bleed already. And while I'm not trying to say that this form is gonna be amazing, I do find it funny of how similar it is to some shin effects from recent IDs with their potency and damage buffs. And then the bleed count effect sounds alright, but I'll leave it to the railway optimizers to decide just how good it is. And on the topic of leaving it to someone else, Meursault's final custom status is Imperfections Addressed, which we're gonna talk about in Rodion's kit. Trust me, this buff won't make or break this ID, it's more just some flavoring and relies on one of Rodion's moves. So don't worry, we've got plenty of time to focus on the rest of Monsieur Mastiff Matisse's passives. For instance, Welling Inspiration is Meursault's sin-powered passive that allows his Masque de Chien form to inflict more rouge per hit. It'll also allow him to heal SP after he inflicts enough rouge on his enemies, or blunt damage up the next turn if he's at max SP when it goes off. This means he acts like a bull. The better off he is and the more red he sees, the harder his giant fist gets. And on the opposite side, his support passive, Impastoed Scar, will allow the fastest ally to inflict defense level down based on the ring clause. It's a fine passive if you're a fan of defense level down builds, assuming those builds even exist. You know what? Let me know in the comments if you run that. You know, before subscribing, liking, sharing, and sending me your teeth in the form of a makeshift sculpture as tribute. And now, if you're actually considering doing that, please consider a job in art instead. Here, I'll even help you get ready. Coloring prep. I'm serious, please don't send me your teeth. Coloring Preparations is Meursault's clashable counter that gains base power if he's in dog mode. It gets more coin power based on blinking and will inflict bleed and sinking potency with its respective coins. Very simple application, very little to say about it. Then we have his offensive skills, which again, all deal more damage based on the ring claws. Le Fauvisme reveals Submission is Meursault's skill 3, which gains final power based on blinking and gets empowered if he's at low enough HP or the enemy has enough of any malt color. If either happens, the third coin gets reused and all coins turn into UBs. And if said reused coin hits, the enemy will get an amount of either bleed or sinking potency based on how much malt color they have. Now the coins themselves are very by the books, inflicting bleed on the first, blinking on the second, and blinking count and rouge on top of the amount that would already come with Meursault's passive on the final coin. And reminder, this is the coin that's reused, so they are very much intending for you to stack that rouge tower high before the random extra blinking comes up in the end. Next up, there's his skill 2, Visceral Strokes. When used, PETA's next mascot here will gain clash power if the enemy does not have any rouge on them, and coin power based on the target's blinking. Now, I can see where this idea of making it easier to start a stack is coming from and why they would give him more coin power because of it. Fingers crossed this is just a bonus because the coins themselves are pretty standard as well. Bleed, blinking, and then bleed count with a side of sinking. All perfectly fine in a vacuum. And rounding him out, there's his skill 1 Rough Portrayal. This makes our taxidermy man gain coin power based on blinking and inflicts bleed on the first coin with blinking count on the second coin. Might not be the most bombastic move, but having count application for both bleed and sinking on the skill you're gonna see most often is generally nice for two statuses that need effort to sustain their stacks. Though if it sounds like I've been a little lukewarm on this idea, well, it's cause I am. While there are some interesting ideas here, the only reason we're staring down this skin-coated stranger is because he's a simpler version of this wanted criminal. And starting with him means that we can skip a lot of what makes up her whole deal. But don't let the event ID status fool you. He's joined the likes of Heisho Sinclair, Heisho Otis, and Lantern Yi Song, all of which were found to have unique uses. So rather than take this to mean he'll be mid, let's just take a look at his vision board. All of Meursault's progression is held back by two thresholds. The first one is the more minor of the two, his max SP. Since he can get a blunt damage buff at max SP, phase 1 is all about applying as much mauve color rouge with all of his skills and getting his SP up to that max. We'll enjoy the Clash Power buff on the skill 2 just for that, and then focus on phase 2, which is just doing more of the same. Get that rouge spread as far as possible and then get him to don his Garp gear so he gets better at applying potency. So then, care to guess what phase 3 is gonna be? Why, it's being a potency machine! Sure, he's good with setting up bleed count when the enemy doesn't have it. It's a handy trick, but with the amount of potency buffs he has, his slot on the team's mainly for left number scaling. But as always, that's just the vision. Now let's see what can make that vision colorblind. Well, as usual, the 15, 20, 25 clause is here. If he can't get close to those numbers with his respective skills, he's gonna have some trouble. And for a good while, the status application on IDs could also be a deal breaker. And I'm not gonna say that number doesn't matter at all, but Meursault having several effects that increase the amount of potency he deals means that even low bleed potency won't matter. And I'm considering his sinking application to be more of a keyword support than a serious focus here. What's more important, however, is just how long his rouge stays around to get that application. Now, speculating on just how much each skill applies and how fast it decays will get complicated fast. Trust me, you'll see how. We're gonna have to do it later. But for now, all that really matters is what I'll call the 1-2-3 rule. If this Borzoi big boy, without Rodion's help, can only make rouge stay until the end of the turn it's applied, that's pretty rough and relies on him being fast for it to get any use, which isn't usually his focus. If rouge lasts 2 turns, meaning the current turn and the next turn, then that's enough to make a target the team can focus and either maintain the stack or let Meursault pick another one. And then with 3 turns total, Meursault can spread this over to several units pretty easily so that rouge is a true play. Now, as far as I'm concerned, so long as the application is greater than the decay per turn and we can at least get 1 full turn, I'll consider it solid. And looking at the way the Rodion idea works, I'm very optimistic about that happening. More on that later. And lastly, I'd like him to be able to get his funny dog hat in about 4 to 5 turns. Sure, not all form changes or one-time changes are equal, but if we look at another example like Ring Faust, she's capable of reliably getting to her transformation in 5 turns, assuming some pretty bad circumstances. So while the standards are a bit lower for an event ID, waiting much longer would mean he's out of his potential for most of many fights. But that's all. He's just a simple simple man with a simple game plan and will do well if he can maintain or ideally spread his pastels all around the arena. And thankfully, he is not punching pelt in the void either. Everything that he can do can also be done by his mentor, and plenty more. The Ring Favis Docent Rodion is a blinking ID that may favor bleed, but puts in her fair share of work for a sinking team, so this is a lot closer to a true dual keyword ID. And her playstyle can be described as being the same as Ring Meursault's, just more. More passives, a more powerful form, a more powerful counter, and a more powerful ultimate offensive skill. And since that's her deal, we're gonna save a lot of time by skipping over parts that are just like how Meursault works. For instance, she also uses Malt Color Rouge. It works the exact same way, so we can safely auto-balance her to blue. My mistake. Blue. Malt Color Blue is essentially the same as its rose-colored counterpart, but for sinking. Instead of bleed, it applies sinking potency on hit, and instead of defense level down, it makes enemies lose SP if they have enough in the stack at the end of the turn. And much like Rouge, she loses some blue on turn end, it makes for a nice little counterpart to make it feel like she really is slinging around a lot of red and blue paint. But of course, if there's a red and blue status to apply, we can all guess what the next question is, right?
What if it was purple?
Would you believe that that clip describes two different statuses on this ID? Because while Meursault only gets one status related to red paint, Rodion doesn't get just one for red and blue, but also a third status about mixing them. That is Touche Hadi. This status may not be a malt color, but much like humility, that does not matter to this Rodion. Like the other two, it's applied through her base skills, and when it's applied, enemies will lose more HP and SP from bleed and sinking based on the stack, with the stack decaying at turn end. And now that we've got red and blue and know how to mix them, all that's left is the product of all those efforts. And trust me, it's a product you're gonna use. Thanks to Rodion's innate passive, Le Fauvisme Collet Sauvage. Man, I hope I got that right. Any enemy that ends their turn with all three of these applied, or any enemy that just has a lot of rouge and blue applied to them, will officially be given a purple visage status. Or as the game calls it, Palette Vibrante. And honestly, they have a much better name. Palette Vibrante will cause enemies to take more damage from the ring allies, all the more so if they're also down with Fauvism, and cause them to randomly gain any possible combination of bleed or sinking potency or count based on the stack. And then like its ingredients, Palette Vibrante expires at turn end, taking half of the rouge and blue stacks with it. Palette Vibrante also just happens to be a fun name to say, so expect to hear it a lot. I'm not sorry about this, it's very fun. While Palette Vibrante is a nice status on its own, applying the sucker is one of the best things you can do for this Rodion. So much so that this ID is getting its own unofficial Vibrante clause. Just like with the ring clause, every single offensive skill on Wolfpack Rodion gets stronger if she's hitting someone with Palette Vibrante. In fact, it's even more present since it's on both of her counters too. Not to mention that it's one of the 3 factors that go into getting her form change status, so let's see what that has to offer next. Le Fauvisme Masque de Loup is similar to Meursault's own empowering status, but does more. Like Meursault's, this status will allow Rodion to apply more blinking potency to the enemy, but instead of a damage and bleed count buff, she'll apply additional blinking count to the enemy based on the respective mold color they have, and get a flat speed boost. And for anyone thinking that Meursault still has a damage buff that she doesn't, then don't worry. I've got a handy link in the description that'll send you to a video that'll explain the clause Meursault doesn't have that tips the scales. It's right down there, it's super easy. For those ready to move on though, exactly how Rodion gets Masque de Loup is one of the more interesting mechanics I've seen on an ID, because this one's got multiple routes. Going back to Couleur Sauvage, Rodion will get her mask if enough of the following conditions are met. She inflicts Palette Vibrante enough times, she uses her special counter Critique enough times, or she uses her skill 3-2 once. And there's a funny thing in the language of kits here. This clause that gives it to her, any X of the conditions are met, implies that it's not just one. See, kits are funny because sometimes they act like English and sometimes they act more like coding. Based on English, this X could technically just be 1, but based on coding, you wouldn't put this X here if it weren't necessary, since it's more efficient to just say, if any of the conditions are met, if you meant just 1. Without going into deeper details and talking about past kit language, it's likely you'll need to fulfill 2 of these conditions. Once we get to the vision board and ruin section, I'll give you more details on how to navigate this, but for now, the first and third paths are your best bet. So just keep in mind how you'll get Palette Vibrante and the skill 3-2. In fact, if you want to know how useful Palette Vibrante is, I've got a link in the description. Needs a rougher touch for this part is Rodion's Sin-powered passive that is as simple as it is effective. It just applies more mauled color and touché hadi with her skills. And it's also at this point, I should let y'all know another way she differs from Meursault. Since Meursault only had the single mauled color status, all of his coins could be made to apply it with a single mention in his passive. However, since Wrong Finger Tanya here has 3 statuses to apply on hit, at least one of these 3 is applied with every single coin in her kit. Honestly, I just think it's neat that we can say that Meursault's Rouge applying passive was made not to make him more powerful, but just for the sake of not making every coin in his kit say it applied that status. Production's just beautiful that way, ain't it? And now, here are some words that anyone following a production schedule has never been told. Nice and slow, don't let it break, is the greatest signal I've seen for something being a Lust Resin support passive. And it's got the classic, beautiful, ring randomized bullshit to go along with it. If your Lust Resin is an odd number, the earliest deployed unit will inflict more bleed potency. If it's an even number, then that same unit will inflict more sinking potency. And if that unit happens to be in the ring, they'll gain either offense or defense level up at combat start. Here's your obligatory conversion chart for both of those. And as fun as this one is, I can't say it's the most reliable passive, even with the ring. Because even if ring units don't only want to inflict bleed, most of them aren't looking to run with sinking. And the same's true with sinking units in that they don't usually want to run lust. I'm sure that someone out there will be glad to find a use for this now or later, but at the moment, I have a hard time seeing a team that wouldn't prefer to have Hurting Teddy Wolf Roja on the field, or just a regular bleed potency puff support passive. Who knows though? Maybe the level up buffs will be handy. Sure as hell a good thing this isn't the only way Roji can give those out, huh? Mentorship is Rodion's second innate passive that gives her a status at turn start called L'Hommage. This status, much like her support passive, will give her either offense or defense level up based on the stack and expire at turn end. Now that would matter if Mentorship didn't activate every turn, so she practically always has this buff active. The only catch is that she only gets L'Hommage equal to the number of ring student identities on the field. Currently, that means it caps out at 3, but since we don't get caps or base stacks in kits, I could see this capping out at either 2 or 3 no matter how many students are on deck. Oh, but she does also give a base offense or defense level up to the other students based on how big her class is. It's a nice buff that really hits home just how much she wants to be better than other people. Ain't that sweet? So, just like her mentorship perks, this roach is all about taking 2 colors and bringing them together to make something better, which eventually makes her stronger as a whole. But then how does that translate to the skills? I gotta say, it's pretty promising. Let's start with her exceptional clashable counter, Trimming the Medium. And what makes this skill so exceptional is that it's the only skill in her kit that does not follow the ring clause in any way, shape, or form. It's literally the exception, but it's still a serviceable defense skill. It gains final power based on blinking and will inflict bleed and rouge on the first coin, as well as sinking and blue on the second coin. Both coins will also apply more of their respective mauled color as a starter bonus if the enemy doesn't have any on them. But if Wolfia doesn't have Reflexion, and if you need to ask, don't worry, she probably doesn't, and the enemy has enough negative God damn it! Okay, so this does have a ring clause. You know what? Fair play, that's fine, we'll keep that in. Well, if you meet it, you use her upgraded clashable counter, Critique. Critique is a clashable counter with only a single coin to show that gets more damage through both the ring and vibrante clauses. Those clauses also come into play on use with the palette vibrante clause giving her clash power up, like the buff, for the whole turn, while the ring clause gives the skill itself clash power. Then she also gains final power if the target has enough blinking potency. But what's most important is the coin's own effect. By default, the coin inflicts blinking in a random mauled color, sure, whatever. But it also gets reused through the ring clause. And if we look at the footage for the ID trailer and slow it down, we can see, using the impact animations, that this coin gets reused up to 3 times, meaning that it can have a total of 4 hits. Thanks to the wording on the skill, we can also safely assume that Touché Hadi will be applied on the 4th coin used, since it doesn't say on X plus reuse. And, well, these effects tend to be used on the final coin. But reused or not, there's one other effect that goes off after the skill ends. After using Critique, Rodion gains the Reflexion status. This status will lock her out of using Critique for as long as it's active, but will give her SP at the start of every turn and decays at the end of every turn. And when the effect fully expires, she'll essentially get twice the amount of L'Hommage she normally would the turn afterward. Using the Critique also activates Meursault Ozone Imperfections Addressed passive, which will give him SP every time the coin is reused, and give him a damage buff for as long as his pack leader has Reflexion. It's kinda cute how both of them heal SP based on talking about art with each other, though the way Reflexion is phrased implies that it's gonna lock you out of using Critique for at least the rest of this turn, and the one afterward. Even with that though, I think it's a neat feature with a fair limitation. What's also handy, and as a final reminder, is that every skill from here on out will deal more damage based on the Ring and Vibrante clauses in some way. Case in point, Rodion's skill 3 Le Fauvisme de Chainment Brutal. When used, this skill will gain coin power based on blinking, and the coins themselves will inflict a sum of blinking potency and count, 2 instances of rouge, 1 instance of bleu, and touche hardy on the last coin, with more touche hardy on the next turn by the ring clause. And while that's all well and good for another 1 skill Vibrante generator, you can upgrade this skill by what else? The ring clause. This will cause Rodion to instead use her skill 3-2, burst forth the pulsing crimson under your skin. It's got 4 unbreakable coins and 3 attack weight, as you can see in the footage, which is counterbalanced by unfocused volley. On use, this skill gains coin power based on blinking on the main target, and will inflict bleed potency and rouge on the first coin, bleed count and rouge on the second, sinking potency and blue on the third, and the fourth will hit all the targets, applying bleed count and touche hardy. With the amount of damage, attack weight, and both existing and new debuffs that are going to be on the target with this, yeah, you can be sure it's gonna make a decent impact. But any ending is only as good as its journey. So let's see what skills she has to build up to this point. Expression of Primary Colors is Rodion's skill 2 that gets a damage boost if the target has enough types of mold color, so presumably 2, as well as coin power from the ring clause and final power based on blinking. And then the coin effects are pretty clear cut, inflicting bleed potency and rouge on the first, and sinking and blue on the second, with some touche hardy on top if you match the ring clause. With a kit that has this many statuses, I feel like I can't call a skill 2 that manages to juggle them all basic. Vehement Overpainting starts as a 1 coin skill 1 that gains clash and final power based on blinking, but can be reused once based on the ring clause. And whether it's on one or both hits, that coin will inflict bleed count, sinking, and rouge. No blue this go around, and that's perfectly fine for a bleed faction. Overall, this ID's a lot of fun and a nice twist on the ring's idea of random bullshit go, by instead taking 2 mechanics that build off of each other really well, and then slinging them both obsessively in the same manner. The concept is extremely win rateable, even if you want to try and get to the Masque de Loup form, but if you're looking for a more structured strategy, well, here's the vision. First off, your main priority should be to apply as many of Roja's colorful debuffs as possible, so they can start stacking on an enemy and apply Palette Vibrante. Getting SP is also good here, don't get me wrong, but if you're able to do that, you shouldn't have any issue making the status that buffs literally every move on Roja. Once there, you can start branching out into ways to get Rodion's Loup Mask on. As mentioned earlier, the phrasing implies you need to meet 2 of these requirements, but we'll go in order of the easiest to hardest ones to reach. If you get lucky in your skill rotation, then using the skill 3-2 is as easy as attacking an enemy with Vibrante with her skill 3. Since the enemy is likely to have 3 to 5 statuses by that point, there's a pretty good chance that's enough to meet the ring clause and trigger the ult. But if you're just not lucky enough to get the skill 3 when you need it, or needed a second option, then it comes down to this question. Can you inflict Vibrante yourself, or is it better to wait for allies to debuff enemies? If it's the first one, then hey, just inflict Vibrante. If not, go for the counter. But if we follow that logic, it would be pretty odd for this ID to struggle to get over enemies and inflict the status she uses to empower her own moves. So I'm inclined to believe that Vibrante is just the more intuitive way to meet the condition. While there is an exception that we'll go over in the possible flaws that can change this, unless we get some kind of upset, going for the skill 3-2 and Palette Vibrante are the easiest options. And then once you've done that, here's your reward! Congratulations! She's fully online and just needs those funny ring clauses to proc to make the most of her moves now. Just keep debuffing and it'll be a walk in the park. But of course, there are some ways that this sucker could end up falling behind the pack. Everything that we said for Meursault essentially applies to her too. But considering the fact that Rodion needs to juggle 2 kinds of mauled color to make her kit work well, I feel more reassured that it's gonna stick around for at least the turn it's applied, and maybe one more than that. The only detail that really gives me pause is just how many times she needs to inflict Vibrante or use Critique in order to get her Masque de Loup. Like I said earlier, the way Reflexion is phrased implies that it's gonna stick around for at least the turn after she gets it, which means that assuming she starts on turn 2, it would take a minimum of 4 turns for Roja to use Critique twice, 6 for 3 times, and so on. Based on that logic, making her use it 3 times or more feels egregious. But you could say the same thing for making her inflict Vibrante more than 4 times, since even with Meursault's help, not all of Roja's skills inflict blue, which is necessary for it to go off, meaning that you'll likely need 5 or more turns to reach that state. In other words, the biggest numbers to watch out for on this ID are how many times Critique needs to be used, and how many times Palette Vibrante needs to be applied to reach her new form, and what the base stack of Reflexion is. Take the base stack of Reflexion and multiply it by how many times she needs to use Critique, and that's about how many turns it'll take to meet that threshold. Then take the number of times she needs to inflict Palette Vibrante and add 1 to it, and that's about how many turns you'll need to meet that condition too. Now that last part I'm assuming will not involve some extreme requirements being used, and I'm keeping simple because of it, but whichever of these two is lower is your better bet for getting Rodion's loot form. Of course, if PM really does intend to just use one condition, then hey, I won't complain. Screw it. Just beeline into the skill tree too and save yourself the hassle. It's simple as. Other than that though, these are some pretty damn fun looking IDs. And I'm sure I'm gonna have a great time seeing how they play as bosses in the new Intervalo. By the way, I'll be streaming that the moment it comes out and running a challenge that involves specifically reading. Like usual, I'll be narrating the Intervalo as it goes, but we'll have to ban an ID or ego every time I stutter through a word. Called a bit of voice training. Beyond that though, that's all I got for you. Let me know what you think of the ID and I'll drop my more fun thoughts in a pinned comment. For now, let's get to the member and patron Q&A. Alright, so it turns out I forgot to ask for more member and patron questions, so we're just gonna go with the second one from Ward. Congratulations, you get a bonus. When you started making YouTube videos, did you expect to get this far into the Project Moon fandom? I guess no, because I started in 2020 and it felt like there just wasn't a fandom to speak of. At least not on YouTube. I think when I started, the most you would see would be like some meme edits and maybe 1 or 2 videos about Project Moon, like by Archangela, but by and large, it was just more like shitpost central, and I've never really liked leaning into the meme side of any community, so I just more wanted to say, hey, here's this cool game I found, here's why it's really neat, I hope you like it. And it turns out, people did, and I'm very grateful.